During his 45th presidential term, Donald Trump took significant steps to stabilize the Middle East and restore a strong U.S. presence in the region. His efforts garnered admiration worldwide, especially given that America's adversaries were powerless to counter them. Trump crafted a highly strategic approach, demonstrating the skills of a seasoned statesman. One of his standout solutions in the Middle East was addressing the complex issues rooted in the region's long history, such as the ongoing conflict between Israel and its neighbors. The Abraham Accords, which he initiated, serve as a prime example of how he skillfully navigated regional tensions. However, when he left the White House, many of these achievements were completely undone. Today, the situation in the Middle East is chaotic, and the U.S. influence in the region has weakened. This will continue to present major challenges for the future U.S. president, especially in the upcoming 7th term. Trump abandons Iran nuclear deal. Iran is a prominent country causing instability in the Middle East. They have developed their nuclear program using financial resources from their abundant oil reserves. Additionally, Iran finances armed groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, which the U.S. labels as terrorist organizations. The 2015 nuclear deal, signed under President Obama, allowed Iran to continue selling oil in exchange for commitments to halt uranium enrichment and permit oversight by countries like the U.S., the U.K., Russia, France, China, and Germany. However, the effectiveness of the monitoring relied on Iran's cooperation, and Iran was eager to unfreeze its frozen accounts to resume uranium enrichment. This would provide the necessary funding to supply its allies with weapons from China and Russia to counter the U.S. and pro-American governments. For this reason, China and Russia were not truly invested in monitoring Iran's nuclear activities, while European countries weren't particularly concerned due to their access to cheap oil and gas from Russia. The U.S. was the only country genuinely worried and focused on this issue. In reality, the nuclear deal with Iran, despite being praised by many, did not yield the expected results. The organizations Iran supports have only grown stronger, while China has sold more weapons and bought cheap crude oil from the Middle East. The position of the U.S. had never been so diminished in the Middle East as it was when the Iran nuclear deal initiative was activated. Never before had a U.S. president been so openly disrespected by China. President Obama, during his visit to China in 2016, was not given the red carpet treatment and had to use a rarely used exit at the belly of the plane to disembark. It was an incident widely seen as a deliberate act of disrespect by China towards the U.S. president. The first step to restore order in the Middle East, President Trump simply withdrew from the nuclear deal that lifted sanctions on Iran, sent U.S. military ships to patrol the seas, and blocked illicit oil trade deals between China and Iran. Simple and effective. Taking down the ISIS leader with a drone. Although organizations like ISIS, Hamas, or Hezbollah may face difficulties without financial support from Iran, that does not make them any less fatigued or incapable of operating. Even without Iran's funding, they still receive assistance from other sources. During a round of golf, Trump skillfully diverted attention from the situation and the media. At the time, he was awaiting information about a surprise attack on the leader of ISIS, an enemy of the United States and one he had committed to eliminating when he became president. The attack utilized drones, working dogs, and U.S. Special Forces. The result was highly successful. The ISIS leader was eliminated quickly. This event silenced many who had doubted America's strength. Trump said, the leader of ISIS was surrounded and ultimately fled into a tunnel, where he triggered a bomb to commit suicide. His remains were unrecognizable and were buried in the tunnel. Containing the oil power of the Middle East and Russia. President Trump also saturated the crude oil market, reducing dependence on oil and gas from Russia and the Middle East by restoring U.S. oil production. The U.S. became the world's leading producer of crude oil. Under Trump, U.S. crude oil reserves reached unprecedented levels. Outside the U.S., Trump ensured the energy security of his European allies while eliminating Russia's influence in the region by constructing 2 pipeline networks, one from Canada to the U.S. and one from Israel to the EU. Such a strategy helped increase crude oil production, with oil prices fluctuating but remaining stable at $50 to $60 per barrel, despite OPEC+, including Russia, continually cutting production. Trump's strategic move on crude oil during his 45th presidency effectively reduced the monopoly on oil and gas in many markets, and this helped make adversarial powers toward the U.S. more moderate. The Abraham Accords. On November 19, 2024, journalist Thomas L. Friedman published an article in the New York Times after the election, which read as follows: Trump is one of the few U.S. leaders to propose a plan for reconciliation between Israel and Palestine. If he implements this plan in 2025, he could be remembered as the person who not only protected Israel, a democracy of the Jewish people, but also helped establish a secure Palestinian state. While Trump may not pay much attention to the history of the Jewish and Palestinian peoples, the history of both nations will surely take note of him. Before Trump's presidency, the 45th president, he inherited a chaotic Middle East from the Obama administration. President Obama, with his pivot to Asia strategy, had reduced America's role in the Middle East, leaving a vacuum that allowed Russia and China to strengthen their influence. Additionally, Obama signed the Iran nuclear deal, which lifted sanctions and allowed Iran to continue selling oil to China. On the Palestinian front, Obama provided hundreds of millions of dollars in aid, though much of it ended up in the hands of Hamas, a group listed by the U.S. as a terrorist organization. Hamas had become a political party and had been in control of Palestine since 2006. At the same time, the Obama administration was less attentive to Israel, an important U.S. ally in the Middle East. This created an adversary for the U.S., bolstered by financial support, and ramped up its activities against the U.S. When Trump took office, he quickly reversed course. He withdrew the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal and imposed harsh economic sanctions, which deprived Iran of funds to support Hamas. Simultaneously, Trump cut hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to Palestine, weakening Hamas, a group whose goal is the destruction of Israel and the unification of Palestinian territories. Hamas's leadership strongly criticized Trump, calling the aid cuts a form of blackmail. However, this move made it harder for Hamas to sustain itself and buy weapons. Israel became stronger thanks to Trump's support. To contain Hamas, Trump sought to reconcile Israel with the Arab nations, the big brothers of the region. One key strategy that Trump implemented was facilitating Arab nations to sign the Abraham Accords, using an East meets West approach, turning many disadvantages into advantages. According to this plan, Israel would be granted the right to annex about 30% of the West Bank, where many Jewish settlers live. The remaining part would belong to a Palestinian state without a military in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Trump also proposed expanding the Gaza Strip by giving it additional land from Israel's Negev desert to compensate for the territory Palestinians would have to relinquish in the West Bank. Furthermore, Trump suggested connecting Gaza and the West Bank with roads and tunnels. However, Arab nations and many countries in the Middle East disagreed with this plan. The United Arab Emirates set a condition. They would sign a peace treaty with Israel on the condition that Israel not implement Trump's plan. They argued that it would disrupt efforts to foster stability between Palestine and Israel, helping to limit escalating conflicts. As soon as Trump left the White House, the forces eager for conflict, war, and control over oil in the Middle East immediately began undoing his achievements. The Biden administration rejoined the Iran nuclear deal and provided $283 million in humanitarian aid to the Hamas government. This influx of funding helped groups like Hamas and Hezbollah accelerate their militant activities. Meanwhile, China and Russia regained their foothold in the Middle East, selling weapons and purchasing cheap oil. We witnessed the U.S. return to the Iran nuclear deal and saw Iran and China sign a $400 billion MOU, a slap in the face to both the U.S. and the 46th presidency. Armed groups sprang back to life across the Middle East, oil prices surged, and the dependency on oil from Russia and the Middle East rose once again. The U.S. appeared weaker, and global political leaders began calling for calm and peace. On October 7, 2023, Israel was attacked, triggering one of the largest conflicts since 1948. Despite President Biden's administration providing significant support to Israel throughout the conflict, it became clear that addressing only the symptoms of the crisis without addressing its root causes would lead to prohibitively high costs for peace. After 14 months of war, neither Israel nor the United States had any clear plan for peace in Gaza. Many young people around the world turned against Israel and the US, seeing Gaza as a place where Israel carried out indiscriminate violence simply for the sake of killing. While Israel's military might be arguably stronger than ever since the conflict began, it found itself more isolated globally than it had been in decades. The challenge of restoring the strategic balance Trump had once established in the Middle East became even more difficult, as divisions were deepened, and old peace corridors were now too fragile to sustain any meaningful progress. However, there remains a possibility that if Israel could lead a new oil and gas pipeline from the region to the EU, Russia would lose its dominant energy leverage, and China would find it harder to profit as a middleman in the oil trade between Russia, Iran, and the EU. A new peace plan could potentially be closely tied to economic, technological, and energy interests. Trump's old tactics of cutting off funding to adversaries historically proven to be effective could once again play a critical role. However, implementing such a strategy would require more time, more substantial investment, and a more coherent political game plan than what Trump could achieve during his 47th presidential term. Once he leaves office, reversing these developments would become even more challenging.